Welcome to Heartbreak Chronicles. When I collapsed on the office floor, the first call the doctor made was to my wife. She didn't come. And as I lay in the ICU with tubes sticking out of me on the third day, my wife's sister tagged me in a photo on Instagram. The whole family having a picnic by the lake. Caption: drama-free family day. Hashtag blessed, hashtag family time, hashtag no filter. I said nothing. A few days later, still lying weakly among medical equipment, I saw 20 missed calls and a text from my wife and father-in-law. "We need you. Call back immediately. Don't overthink it." That was Monday morning at 10:47 a.m. I remember it clearly because the digital clock on the conference room wall was the last thing I saw before my body decided to completely give up in front of my boss and half the marketing department. 1 minute, I was clicking through slide 17, explaining third quarter revenue optimization strategies, pretty brilliantly actually. The next minute, my chest felt like someone was using my ribs as a punching bag while a python was wrapping around my lungs. My head started spinning like that feeling after downing an entire bottle of tequila at college parties, except without the fun that usually precedes such dizziness. "Harper, are you okay?" That was Knox from accounting. He was probably more worried about missing his lunch break than my impending death. How touching, Knox. I tried to respond, tried to act like nothing was wrong, as if I was just allergic to those motivational office posters, but my voice became this weird wheeze that sounded like a deflating balloon. Then, that ugly beige carpet we'd all complained about for 3 years suddenly rushed up to meet me, enthusiastic as a golden retriever. Lights out. When I regained consciousness, I was staring at those horrible fluorescent hospital lights that make everyone look like extras in a zombie movie. You know those lights, flickering just enough to make you question your sanity, casting shadows that would make funeral directors jealous. My chest felt like someone had parked a small car on it, and I was connected to more wires than a Best Buy display model. "Welcome back," said a nurse wearing scrubs with cartoon cats, her eyes kind. "Because nothing says professional medical care like Hello Kitty. Right? You gave us quite a scare, Harper. You're lucky to be alive." "Lucky?" "Yeah. Lying there like a human Christmas tree, decorated with monitor wires, I felt especially lucky." Then came Dr. Damon, or was it Dr. Gonzalez? Damn, my brain was still doing somersaults. Let's call him Dr. Serious Face. This guy had that expression perfected in medical school. The kind that says, "I'm about to tell you news that will make your insurance premiums look like pocket change." "Mr. Harper," he said, looking at his chart like it held the secrets of the universe, "you've experienced what we call a cardiac event. The serious kind. Your heart basically said, 'I quit,' and took an unscheduled vacation." Cardiac event. You have to admire medical terminology. They make it sound like your heart threw a surprise party instead of nearly killing you. But I got the message. I had a heart attack at 34, which felt about as pleasant as discovering your favorite restaurant had been serving rat burgers all along. "We've contacted your emergency contact," Dr. Serious Face continued. "Your wife, Brooke, should be here soon." Should. Those two words hung in the air like a bad smell. Brooke should be here. My wife of 6 years, the woman who promised to love me in sickness and in health. Remember that little promise from the wedding vows? She should be bursting through those hospital doors right now, probably crying and clutching a teddy bear or flowers grabbed from the gift shop. But the thing about should is that it's about as reliable as a chocolate teapot. First night, nothing. No Brooke rushing through the door. No frantic calls asking about my condition. Just me, the beeping machines, and a steady rotation of nurses constantly checking if I needed anything. Yes, I did need something. I needed my wife to care that I'd almost left this mortal coil. I kept staring at my phone like a lovesick teenager, hoping it would buzz with a text or call. Hell, even a carrier pigeon would have been nice. The screen stayed dead, much like my marriage apparently was. Day 2 arrived, still no sign of Brooke. The young doctor, Dr. Reed, according to his name tag, kept patting my arm with that standard compassion they teach in Medicine 101. "Rest up, Mr. Harper," he'd say. "Someone should be here soon. Someone should be here." There was that word again, should. It was starting to feel like a cruel joke, like expecting your GPS to work in a tunnel, or believing politicians are actually sincere during campaign season. The nurses tried to be encouraging, Traffic might be bad, suggested the one with the cat scrubs. Maybe she's stuck at work, offered another. Sure, because nothing says loving spouse quite like prioritizing spreadsheets over your husband's coronary event. I spent those first 2 days in a strange mental fog, part medication, part gradually realizing that the person who should care most whether I lived or died apparently thought I wasn't worth the gas money to drive to the hospital to check on me. The other patients on my floor, and yes, hospital walls have about the same soundproofing as tissue paper, had a constant stream of visitors. Room 314 had so many flowers it looked like a funeral home had exploded. Room 318's family brought enough food to feed a small army. And me? I became intimately familiar with every rerun of The Price is Right and best friends with the vending machine at the end of the hall. But what really got to me was that I wasn't even angry. You'd think I'd be furious, right? Ready to throw Jell-O cups at walls and demand explanations. Instead, I felt this weird, hollow numbness, like someone had scooped out everything inside me and replaced it with cotton balls. Maybe that's what happens when the person who's supposed to love you unconditionally prove their love comes with more conditions than a cell phone contract. Maybe your brain just shuts down the disappointment center to prevent total system failure. By the end of day 2, I'd stopped checking my phone every 5 minutes. I'd stopped making excuses for Brooke in my head. I'd stopped expecting anything. And you know what? That might have been the first healthy thing I'd done in years. The machines kept beeping, monitoring my vital signs, making sure my heart kept working despite the fact that it apparently had better instincts about my marriage than my brain did. Smart organ, the heart. Too bad I hadn't listened to it sooner. But that was about to change. Day 3 of my involuntary stay at Hotel St. Mary's. And I was starting to feel like Tom Hanks in that movie where he's stranded on an island. Except instead of volleyball named Wilson, I had a heart monitor that beeped every time I thought about how thoroughly my wife had failed at basic human decency. I was lying there counting ceiling tiles like some demented mathematician. 247 of them, if you're wondering. That's when my phone finally decided to make some noise. For half a second, my stupidly optimistic heart did this little hopeful flutter that was probably recorded on every machine I was connected to. Maybe it was Brooke. Maybe she'd been in some kind of accident herself. Or her phone had died. Or she'd been pinned under something heavy and only now managed to crawl to safety. You know, all those ridiculous scenarios your brain invents when someone you love acts like you've suddenly become invisible. But no. Well, no. It was Instagram. Because of course it was. In an age where people document their breakfast like they're running for public office, why would a little thing like a family member nearly dying interrupt their social media schedule? The notification read, "At Harper_Grace tagged you in a photo." Harper, that's Brooke's sister. The one who thinks influencer is a real job and photographing avocado toast constitutes a contribution to society. Her depth is roughly equivalent to a puddle in August. But hey, at least she's consistent. I clicked on the notification with the kind of morbid curiosity you have when driving past a car accident. You know it's going to be bad, but you just can't look away. And there it was, rendered in Valencia filter glory. A perfect little family scene that looked straight out of a Hallmark car commercial. There was Harper, blonde hair, catching the sunlight just right, wearing a flowing dress that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. Next to her was Brooke, my wife. Remember her? Looking radiant and carefree in a way I hadn't seen in months. But wait, there's more. Because standing behind them, like some kind of suburban parent statue, were Brooke's parents, Griffin and Diana. Griffin had his arm around Diana, both sporting the kind of joy that people have when they've just won the lottery, not the kind you'd expect from people whose son-in-law was playing human pincushion in the cardiac ward. The setting was perfect too, because of course it was. They were at Clearwater Lake, about 2 hours north of the city. The same place Brooke and I had our first anniversary picnic. Remember that one, honey? Back when we still pretended to like each other. A red checkered picnic blanket was spread on grass. A wicker basket that probably came from some boutique that charges $50 for rustic charm. And enough gourmet sandwiches and artisanal drinks to feed a small European country. The caption. The caption was where Harper really showed her true colors. that signature blend of basic girl aesthetic and casual cruelty. She wrote, "Family Day. No drama, red heart sparkles. Sometimes you need to surround yourself with people who lift you up. Hashtag blessed, hashtag family time, hashtag no filter, hashtag lake life, hashtag no drama." But here's the real kicker. The thing that made me want to rip these heart monitor wires off and strangle someone with them. They actually tagged me in this monument to collective sociopathy. Like they wanted me to see it. Like they wanted me to know that while I was lying in hospital bed, wondering if my heart would permanently quit, they were out there living their best life without the inconvenience of my near-death experience ruining their aesthetic. I stared at this digital middle finger for a full 5 minutes. My brain tried to process what I was seeing. The timestamp showed the photo was posted about 2 hours ago, which meant they were there having their little family reunion right around the time Dr. Reed was explaining to me that if I wanted to live to see 40, I needed to make some major lifestyle changes. The comment section was exactly what you'd expect from Harper's followers, a string of heart eye emojis and squad goals. Also, you guys are so cute, because nothing's cuter than abandoning a family member in their hour of need to go take pictures by a lake. But when I scrolled down a bit, I saw something that made my blood pressure spike. So high I was surprised every alarm in the ICU didn't go off. One of Brooke's cousins, Sage I think, one of those interchangeable J names that all sound the same, commented, "Where's Harper?" Faced with tears of joy. And Harper, sweet, thoughtful Harper, replied with a laughing crying emoji and these words. He's taking time to work on himself. Flexed biceps were supporting his journey. Folded hands. My journey. My fucking journey. Like I had chosen to have a heart attack. Like I had decided, you know what would be fun? Let me almost die on a Monday morning and see if anyone gives a shit. I screenshot the whole thing because at this point I was collecting evidence, like I was building a case, though I wasn't sure what kind of case you can build against people for being heartless pieces of shit. Is there a court for crimes against basic decency? Can you sue a sociopath with a smartphone? The worst part, and there were many parts to choose from, like some horrible sample platter, was that I could imagine exactly how this had gone down. Brooke had probably gotten the call from the hospital while she was getting ready for work. Maybe she paused for a whole 30 seconds, considering whether she should come check on the husband who'd just had a cardiac event. Then Harper probably called with some crisis about her boutique or latest social media strategy. Suddenly, my medical emergency became an inconvenient speed bump in their family picnic plans. I could hear the conversation now. "Oh my God, Brooke, we can't cancel leg day just because Harper's having some kind of episode. He's probably fine. You know how dramatic he gets. Besides, this is perfect lighting for my feed." And Diana brought those cute vintage mason jars. And Brooke, my dear wife Brooke, probably nodded along because God forbid she missed being part of Harper's latest Instagram fame attempt, because that's what really mattered. Making sure the family brand stayed strong while actual family members withered in hospital beds. The pain in my chest wasn't just from the heart attack anymore. It was something deeper, something that made the physical pain feel like a paper cut compared to the realization that the people I thought loved me had been treating me like an optional supporting character in their lives. I put the phone down and went back to staring at those ceiling tiles, but now I wasn't counting them anymore. I was thinking about how the universe sometimes has funny ways of showing you exactly where you stand in people's hearts. Sometimes it takes almost dying to realize that to some people, you were never really alive in their world to begin with. Something inside me changed that day, deep down. Not broken. Broken was too dramatic, too sudden. More like something quietly, permanently switching off. Day 4 of my involuntary stay at St. Mary's Hotel for the emotionally and physically wounded, and I'd entered what the staff would probably call acceptance, but I prefer to think of as strategic numbness. You know that feeling when you've been punched in the gut so many times that your body stops registering the pain? Yeah, that's where I was living now. In the sweet land of emotional anesthesia, where Instagram posts about family picnics and absent wives couldn't touch me because I had officially stopped giving any fucks. I'd become friends with Felix, the night shift janitor who spoke broken English but had a PhD in reading people's bullshit. He took one look at my visitor-less room and started bringing me decent coffee from the staff break room instead of that watered-down swill they serve patients. We didn't talk much, language barrier and all, but sometimes the best therapy is just having someone acknowledge your situation sucks without trying to fix it or explain it away. Dr. Reed had also started checking on me more frequently, probably because he'd noticed my emergency contact was about as reliable as a chocolate teapot. He began carefully asking about my support system at home, which is medical terminology for why the hell isn't anyone visiting this poor bastard. I got good at deflecting these conversations with jokes about being a social butterfly who just preferred alone time. Very convincing stuff. But then my phone decided to have a seizure. I was half asleep, floating in that weird hospital twilight zone where the morphine makes everything feel like you're watching your own life through someone else's eyes when the buzzing started. Not just one or two buzzes, but this relentless, angry vibration that sounded like a pissed-off wasp trapped in a mason jar. At first, I thought one of the machines was malfunctioning. Wouldn't be the first time one of the medical devices I was hooked up to had a tantrum. But no, it was my phone lighting up like a Christmas tree in Times Square. Except instead of spreading holiday cheer, it was broadcasting what looked like a full-blown panic attack from the 847 area code. 20 missed calls. 20. I counted twice because this couldn't be right. Who calls someone 20 times in 2 hours? The answer, apparently, was my dear wife and her dear daddy, Griffin. You know, the same people who'd been too busy with lakeside picnics to check if I was still alive for the past 4 days. But now, apparently, they needed me with the urgency of a SWAT team responding to a hostage situation. The calls had started around 2 p.m., coming in like some kind of digital tsunami. Brooke, Griffin, Brooke, Griffin, Brooke again. A perfect ping-pong match of desperation bouncing between two people who had apparently just remembered I existed. The call log read like a horror movie where the calls are coming from inside the house. Except in this case, they were coming from inside my marriage, and they were 4 fucking days too late. Then came the text, not texts, plural, like normal humans send when trying to reach someone, just one single, perfectly crafted message that managed to say everything and nothing at the same time. We need you. Call back immediately. That's it. No, how are you feeling? No, sorry we haven't been in touch. No, hope you didn't die in a ditch somewhere. Just a demand, wrapped in the kind of tone you use for a dog that's wandered too far from the yard. We need you. Call back immediately, like I was some kind of customer service hotline they could call when life wasn't working out the way they wanted. The irony was beautiful. It came from both of them, a group text from Brooke and Griffin, because apparently they'd coordinated this little intervention like they were planning a military operation. Probably sitting at the same picnic table where they'd celebrated their drama-free family time, deciding that maybe, just maybe, they needed their personal ATM back online. I stared at that message for what felt like an hour, but was probably about 5 minutes. The audacity was almost impressive. 4 days of radio silence while I lay in a hospital bed, wondering if my heart was going to give up entirely. Now they hit me with "we need you" like I was the asshole for not being available. Like I've been screening their calls while my chest was cracked open and my arteries were being examined by people with medical degrees. The funny thing, and by funny, I mean soul-crushingly ironic, was the calm I felt reading it. You'd think 20 missed calls from your wife would make your heart rate spike, especially when said heart had recently tried to retire. But instead, I felt this weird, almost zen-like detachment, like I was reading about someone else's drama, watching some other poor bastard's marriage implode in real time. That's when I remembered something I probably hadn't thought about in 5 years. My grandfather, Victor, my mother's father, the man who taught me how to fish and how to spot bullshit from a mile away. Though if he knew how badly I'd forgotten that second lesson, he'd probably be rolling in his grave. He'd been the only person in my family who never asked me for anything. Never made me feel like my worth was tied to what I could provide, fix, or pay for. I hadn't called him God. When was the last time? Maybe Christmas 2 years ago. Brooke always found excuses for why we couldn't visit him. Too far, not enough time. He lived in that little apartment that smelled like old books and pipe tobacco. Every time I mentioned him, she'd wrinkle her nose like he was some embarrassing relic from my past she'd rather keep buried. But sitting in that hospital bed, staring at 20 missed calls and a text that treated me like a malfunctioning appliance, I found myself scrolling through my contacts until I found his number. Victor Morrison, sitting right there between emergency plumber and Frank from accounting, like he was just another service provider instead of the only person who'd ever loved me unconditionally. My hands were shaking, and this time it wasn't from the medication. When I hit the call button, it rang once, twice, then like some kind of miracle in a world notably short on miracles lately, I heard his voice. Hello. Same gruff tone I remembered, like he'd been smoking and drinking whiskey since the Carter administration, which he probably had. Grandpa. My voice cracked like I was 13 again, calling him after getting beat up at school. It's me. It's your grandson. There was a pause, and for a second I thought maybe he didn't remember me. Maybe it had been too long. Maybe when I let Brooke convince me that family obligations were just another form of drama that should be avoided, I'd burn that bridge too. But then he said, "Which hospital?" Just like that. No questions about why I was calling after years of silence. No demands for explanations or apologies. Just which hospital, like he'd been waiting by the phone for this call. Like he somehow knew that eventually I'd need someone who actually gave a damn whether I lived or died. Within an hour, 1 fucking hour compared to my wife's 4 days of nothing, he was there. When Victor walked into my hospital room, it was like watching a man step out of a time machine from an era when people actually cared about each other. He wore the same old brown leather jacket I remembered from childhood, the one that probably cost him a week's wages in 1987 but had survived 3 decades of Chicago winters. His shoes were worn but polished, the kind of dress shoes working-class men wore to church on Sunday and job interviews on Monday. Everything about him screamed old school in the best possible way. The first thing he did was look directly into my eyes. Not at the machines, not at the chart hanging from my bed, but straight at me, like he needed to make sure I was still in there, somewhere under all the medical equipment and emotional wreckage. Then he pulled over one of those uncomfortable plastic chairs every hospital room comes equipped with and sat down like he had all the time in the world. "You look like hell," he said, which was probably the most honest thing anyone had said to me in days. No sugarcoating, no false cheer, just straight assessment from a man who'd seen enough of life to know that sometimes people look like hell because they feel like hell. Thanks, Grandpa. Really know how to make a guy feel better about his near-death experience. He chuckled. That dry, raspy sound that reminded me of autumn leaves crunching under your feet. Son, if you wanted someone to blow sunshine up your ass, you should have called your wife. Ouch. But also fair point. What happened next was peak Victor Morrison efficiency. While I'd been lying there for 4 days wallowing in self-pity and counting ceiling tiles, he spent exactly 30 minutes asking the right questions, the ones doctors should have been hearing from my wife. What symptoms had I been having before the attack? Was I under unusual stress? Was I taking any medications they should know about? What was my family medical history? You know, basic shit that might be relevant when someone's heart decides to stage a mutiny. But here's the kicker. Brooke could have answered exactly 0 of these questions. She didn't know my father died of a heart attack at 52. She didn't know I'd been having chest pains for weeks, but was too busy paying for her sister's boutique rent to go see a doctor. She didn't even know what medications I was allergic to, which is pretty important information when they're pumping you full of heart drugs. But Victor knew. He'd been paying attention for the past 67 years while everyone else had been treating me like a walking credit card with legs. Then he quietly left and came back an hour later with paperwork. Turns out my insurance company had been playing the classic, let's deny coverage and hope this poor bastard dies before he can appeal game with some tests the cardiologist wanted to run. Standard operating procedure for American healthcare. Delay, deny, deflect, and pray the problem resolves itself permanently. Victor didn't argue with them, didn't threaten to call lawyers or make a scene like Brooke probably would have. He just pulled out a checkbook, an actual paper checkbook, because this man still balanced his accounts manually like a civilized human being and wrote a check for the full amount. Just like that, problem solved. Grandpa, you can't. I can. I did. Shut up and let them run the tests. But that wasn't even the real bombshell. Oh no, the universe was just warming up. After the nurses left and we had some privacy, Victor pulled out a tablet because despite being 74, this man was more tech-savvy than half the millennials I worked with and said those 4 words that would change everything. Let's look at your finances. Now, I thought I knew where my money was going. I made decent money, live in a nice house, drove a reliable car. Sure, things were tight sometimes, but that was just modern life, right? Everyone was broke. Everyone was stressed. Everyone was one medical emergency away from financial ruin. That was the American dream, baby. Wrong. So fucking wrong, it wasn't even funny. Victor had somehow, and I'm still not entirely sure how he managed this without access to my accounts, mapped every financial thread connecting me to Brooke's family. It was like watching someone perform an autopsy on your bank account, except instead of finding cause of death, they were finding cause of slow, methodical bleeding. 5 accounts, 5 separate accounts I'd somehow forgotten about or never really paid attention to, all with my name on them, all feeding money to various members of the Martinez family like some kind of financial drip. Brooke's personal checking account, which I'd added myself to for emergencies, and which she'd been using to pay for her Starbucks habit and Target runs. The business account for Harper's Boutique, which I'd co-signed for when she was getting it established 3 years ago. Established, right? A line of credit for Griffin's eternally failing home improvement projects. There was even a fucking car insurance policy covering Brooke's car, Harper's car, and Diana's ancient Honda. Jesus Christ, I whispered, staring at the numbers on his tablet screen. How did I not know about all this? Because they made sure you didn't, Victor said matter-of-factly. Look here, Harper's Boutique rent auto-deducts from your business account on the 15th of every month. Has been for 3 years. You've been bankrolling her playing dress-up store while she posts Instagram photos about being a boss babe entrepreneur. The rent alone was $1,500 a month. $1,500 monthly for 3 years. That was $54,000 I'd unknowingly invested in my sister-in-law's delusion that she was the next big thing in overpriced scarves and inspirational jewelry. But wait, there was more. Brooke's car insurance, which I thought was maybe $200 a month, was actually covering 3 vehicles because family helps family, and I was apparently the designated family ATM. Griffin's mortgage had gone into default twice in the past year, twice, and mysterious payments from accounts linked to my name had appeared to save their perfect suburban house from foreclosure. Holy shit, I said, scrolling through transaction after transaction. I've been carrying all of them. This whole time, I've been funding their entire lifestyle. Victor leaned back in his chair with a sigh. That deep, world-weary sigh that comes from watching someone you care about finally wake up to reality. Son, they don't love you. They use you. 6 words. 6 simple words that cut through 8 years of marriage. 8 years of trying to be a good husband, a reliable provider, the guy who never complained when money was tight because he was too busy making sure everyone else was comfortable. They don't love you. They use you. Sitting in that hospital bed, surrounded by machines monitoring my broken heart, I finally understood why I had tried to quit in the first place. It wasn't the stress of work or the long hours or the shitty office politics. It was the slow, steady realization that my entire adult life had been as someone else's financial plan, someone else's backup option, someone else's safety net. I wasn't Brooke's husband. I wasn't Harper's brother-in-law. I wasn't Griffin and Diana's son-in-law. I was a walking wallet with a pulse, and apparently not even a very reliable pulse at that. That night, as the nurses made their rounds and the machines beeped their electronic lullabies, Victor and I started cutting those threads one by one account at a time, one automatic payment at a time. It felt like performing surgery on my own financial life. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I could actually breathe. If you've ever wondered what happens when you cut the economic life support on a family of professional parasites, let me tell you, it's like watching a nature documentary about what happens when the water hole dries up in the middle of the savannah. Except instead of graceful gazelles migrating to greener pastures, you get a bunch of adults having public breakdowns because their personal ATM suddenly grew a spine. The reaction was so swift you'd think I'd detonated a nuclear bomb in their perfectly curated suburban lives. I'm talking less than 24 hours from when Victor and I started canceling auto payments and closing accounts. And my phone was lighting up like a Christmas tree on steroids. But this time, when Brooke's name appeared on my screen, instead of that familiar anxiety, I felt something that might have been enlightenment or the lingering effects of heart medication. Either way, It felt liberating as hell. Brooke's voicemail came first, and oh my God, it was a masterpiece of self-righteous indignation wrapped in that fake concerned wife voice she'd perfected over the years. You know the tone, the one that sounds like she's talking to a particularly slow child who's just colored outside the lines for the 100th time. I don't know what game you think you're playing, she started, because apparently having a heart attack and nearly dying was just some dramatic performance I was putting on for attention. But cutting off accounts. Really? That's your solution? I don't know what's gotten into you, but this isn't how you handle whatever midlife crisis you're going through. You're being incredibly selfish right now, and frankly, it's embarrassing. I've been trying to give you space to deal with your issues, but this is crossing a line. Call me back. We need to talk like adults. Like adults, right? Because nothing says adult conversation quite like completely ignoring your husband for 4 days while he's hospitalized, then lecturing him about responsibility when the money stops flowing. The sheer fucking audacity was almost impressive, but Brooke's voicemail was just the opening act. The real show started with Harper's text messages, and I swear to God, it was like watching someone's entire personality implode in real time. No cute emojis, no inspirational quotes, no hashtags about being blessed and grateful. Just raw, unfiltered panic from someone who just realized their entire business model was about to collapse. My account balance is $19. Fix this. That was it. No, how are you feeling? No, hope you're recovering well. Just a bank balance and a demand, like I was customer service for her life. $19. That's what 3 years of playing entrepreneur had netted her without a husband paying for the entire operation. 19 fucking dollars in a boutique where the scarves probably cost more than they could sell them for. The irony wasn't lost on me. This was the same woman who'd been posting Instagram stories about building an empire and living that boss girl life while I unknowingly paid her rent, utilities, insurance, and probably her daily iced coffee habit. Now she had grocery money left, and suddenly I was supposed to drop everything and fix it. Like her financial incompetence was somehow my emergency. But wait, there was more. Because Griffin, dear old Griffin, who'd been too busy enjoying his drama-free family picnic to visit his hospitalized son-in-law, decided to weigh in with his own special brand of guilt trip masquerading as fatherly wisdom. You're destroying everything we've built together. This family has been through enough without you having a tantrum because of health issues. We're all here to support you, but you need to meet us halfway. You can't just burn everything down because you're upset. Everything we've built together. Let that phrase marinate for a minute. According to Griffin, this man who'd never contributed a single penny or even less emotional support to any aspect of my life, we'd built something together. Apparently, my money and their spending habits constituted some kind of collaborative effort that I was now selfishly destroying by taking control of my own finances. And the health issues comment, brilliant. Nothing minimizes a cardiac event quite like calling it issues. Like I've been spooked by a spider instead of my heart literally trying to quit its job. Real sensitive stuff from a man who couldn't be bothered to visit me while I was hospitalized, but could find time to lecture me about family loyalty via text message. But here's where it got really spectacular. And by spectacular, I mean so pathetically predictable that I actually started laughing in my hospital bed, which probably made the nurses think the morphine was finally kicking in properly. Within 48 hours of the money being cut off, Brooke's family went from drama-free family day to full social media meltdown mode. They posted a video, an actual goddamn video, showing their house completely emptied out after receiving an eviction notice. Empty rooms, scattered boxes. That special kind of chaos that happens when the sheriff shows up and gives you 24 hours to get your shit together. Harper was behind the camera, and you could hear her voice shaking as she filmed room after room of what used to be their middle-class paradise. They took everything, she narrated, like she was documenting some kind of natural disaster instead of the completely foreseeable consequences of their own financial irresponsibility. Everything we worked so hard for, everything we build, it's gone. The caption was even better. They took everything. Guess who let them do it? With broken heart emojis and hashtags about family support groups, like they were victims of some cosmic injustice instead of people who'd been living beyond their means on someone else's money for years. But what really made me realize how deep their delusion went was that they seemed to genuinely believe the bank had stolen their house. Like some mustache-twirling villain had showed up and arbitrarily decided to ruin their lives just for fun. They were playing the victim role so hard you'd think they'd been struck by lightning instead of served with an eviction notice for not paying their mortgage. Except I knew the truth. Thanks to Victor and his financial revelation magic tablet, I knew exactly where their mortgage payments had been going. Griffin had been using mortgage money to fund Harper's boutique inventory and Diana's medical bills. They'd been robbing Peter to pay Paul. Except Peter was their own housing security, and Paul was a failing business selling overpriced accessories to women having their own midlife crises. The bank hadn't stolen their house. They'd gambled it away and lost, then acted shocked when the casino always wins. They'd taken a perfectly good suburban home, paid for with a down payment that was a wedding gift to Brooke from yours truly, by the way, and turned it into collateral for their daughter's entrepreneurial fantasies. Now, they wanted me to feel guilty about it. They wanted me to see their videos of empty houses and crocodile tears and come running back to the fold, checkbook open and mouth shut, ready to fix everything like I always had before. But lying in that hospital bed, watching their perfectly orchestrated pity party unfold on my phone screen, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Absolutely fucking nothing. No guilt, no obligation, no desperate need to save the day. Just calm, clear understanding that this is what accountability looks like when it finally catches up with people who'd spent a lifetime avoiding it. You know that moment in horror movies when you think the monster is finally dead, and then its hand shoots out of the dirt to give you one last scare? Yeah. Well, welcome to my life, where the monster is my wife's family, and they're about to pull some next-level psycho shit that would make Stephen King proud. I was actually starting to feel human again. The doctors had cleared me for discharge in a few days. My chest no longer felt like someone had parked a semi-truck on it. And for the first time in years, I was sleeping through the night, my brain no longer spinning with endless lists of bills, obligations, and who needed what money to go where. Turns out life becomes significantly less stressful when you're no longer financially responsible for 4 other adults and their various disasters. Who knew? Victor came by every day, not because he felt obligated or because I was paying him to be there, but because that's what real family does. We've been working through the remaining financial loose ends, canceling the last few auto payments, transferring accounts, basically performing surgery on 8 years of financial entanglement. It felt like detoxing from a drug I didn't even know I'd been addicted to. That's when he walked in with an envelope. Now, Victor's not the dramatic type. He doesn't do grand gestures or mysterious reveals. When he has something to tell you, he just tells you. But this time, he looked like he'd aged about 5 years overnight, and he was holding that envelope like it contained anthrax or divorce papers or some other form of weaponized misery. "Son," he said, settling into that plastic chair that had basically become his personal throne, "we need to talk about what your wife's family is really up to." He opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of printed emails. Not forwarded emails or screenshots, but actual printed copies that someone had obtained through means I could only assume weren't entirely legal. Victor had always been resourceful, but this was some next-level private investigator shit. "How did you— Don't ask questions you don't want answers to," he said, which was possibly the most gangster thing a 74-year-old man in a cardigan had ever said in the history of cardigans. The emails were correspondence between Brooke, Griffin, and one Marcus Hoffman from Hoffman & Associates law firm. Let me tell you, reading them was like watching a slow-motion train wreck, except the train was my entire life, and the wreck was happening while I was unconscious in a hospital bed. The first email, dated just 2 days after my heart attack, was from Griffin to this Hoffman guy, with Brooke CC'd. The subject line alone made my blood pressure monitor start beeping like a smoke alarm. "Emergency guardianship consultation, urgent." "Mr. Hoffman," Griffin wrote, "as we discussed on the phone, my son-in-law has suffered a serious cardiac event and is currently hospitalized. His behavior since the incident has become increasingly unstable and concerning. He's made several irrational financial decisions that are putting his family's security at risk, and we're worried about his mental state. We need to explore temporary guardianship options to protect his assets and ensure he gets the help he needs. Unstable behavior, irrational financial decisions, mental state. These assholes were trying to have me declared mentally incompetent because I'd stopped paying their bills. They were actually attempting to gain legal control of my finances by claiming that cutting them off was evidence of mental illness. Brooke's next email was even better. She laid out an entire timeline of my supposed mental health deterioration, starting with my decision to stop the auto payments, including such compelling evidence as refusing to answer phone calls and isolating from family. According to my dear wife, my behavior over the past week had been concerning, and she was worried about my safety and the safety of our financial future. Our financial future, right? Because apparently Brooke's boutique funding and Griffin's mortgage gambling habit were integral parts of my financial future. But here's where it got really fucking evil. They found a lawyer who specialized in emergency guardianship for people whose capacity was compromised due to medical events. Apparently, this is a thing. When someone has a stroke or severe illness or, say, a cardiac event, concerned family members can petition the court to control their finances if they can prove the person isn't thinking clearly. The lawyer laid out the entire strategy in his reply email. They needed medical documentation of my heart attack, witness statements about my unstable behavior, and evidence that the financial decisions I was making went against my established patterns. The goal was temporary guardianship, just enough to restore financial stability and ensure proper medical care. Translation: just enough to regain control of my bank accounts and credit lines so they could continue bleeding me dry while I recovered. This is their nuclear option, Victor said, watching me read email after email detailing their carefully planned assault. When the crying and guilt trips didn't work, when the social media pity party didn't send you running back with an open checkbook, they decided to just take legal control. I kept reading, my hands shaking, and this time it wasn't for medication or heart problems. It was pure concentrated rage. They'd spent more time planning this legal maneuver than they'd spent visiting me in the hospital. They'd put more effort into researching guardianship laws than they'd put into asking how I felt or whether I was going to survive this thing. The most insidious part was how they made it sound legitimate. Reading their emails, you'd think they were genuinely concerned family members trying to help a loved one who'd clearly lost his mind after a traumatic medical event. They'd even lined up witnesses, Diana's sister who barely knew me, and some neighbors who'd apparently noticed I'd become withdrawn and antisocial lately. Withdrawn and antisocial? Yeah, probably because I've been working myself into a heart attack, paying for other people's lifestyles while my wife treated me like an inconvenient roommate who occasionally provided funding. But the cherry on this shit sundae was Brooke's final email to the lawyer. We just want what's best for him. He's not thinking clearly right now, and we're afraid he's going to ruin everything we've worked so hard to build together. If we can take temporary control until he's stable again, we can make sure he gets the help he needs and protect our family's future. Our family's future. There was again that beautiful delusion that their financial security was somehow my responsibility, that their bad decisions were my emergency, that their comfort was more important than my autonomy. They were going to have me declared mentally unfit so they could legally steal my money. They were going to use my heart attack, the medical emergency they'd been too busy to acknowledge, as evidence that I couldn't be trusted to manage my own finances. They were going to turn my recovery into their opportunity. The hearing is scheduled for next week, Victor said quietly. They filed the petition yesterday. I looked up from the emails, and for a moment I couldn't speak. The level of their betrayal was breathtaking. These weren't just greedy relatives trying to guilt me into opening my wallet again. These were people willing to declare me legally incompetent to destroy my reputation, my autonomy, my basic human dignity, just to keep their money train running. What do we do? I asked, though I already knew Victor wouldn't have brought me this information without having a plan. He smiled, and it was a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who'd been around long enough to know how to fight dirty when the situation called for it. We beat them to the punch, he said, pulling out his phone. I've already called your lawyer. By tomorrow morning, you'll have restraining orders filed against all of them. account freezes to prevent any unauthorized access, legal protections that will make this guardianship petition look like what it really is, a money grab from people who never gave a damn about your welfare. For the first time since this nightmare started, I felt something that might have been hope, or maybe just the satisfaction of knowing that finally someone was fighting for me instead of fighting to exploit me. When a legal nuclear option failed, because apparently having a lawyer who actually cared about his client was more effective than having one who specialized in elder abuse disguised as family concern, Brooks' clan decided to pivot to their backup plan, destroy my reputation so thoroughly that I'd crawl back to them just to make it stop. It was like watching a masterclass in manipulation, except instead of being impressed, I was getting a front row seat to how low people will go when their meal ticket develops a conscience. The whole thing started innocently enough, which should have been my first red flag. When was Harper ever innocent? She posted what looked like a simple selfie. No fancy filters, no perfect lighting, just her sitting in what appeared to be her car, looking like she'd been crying for about 3 hours. Which, knowing Harper's relationship with waterproof mascara, probably meant she'd spent 3 hours in front of a mirror practicing to get the perfect look of anguish that was still photogenic. The caption was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive emotional manipulation. Sometimes the people we love most are going through the hardest times. When someone you care about is hurting, they might lash out at the people trying to help them. All we can do is send love and hope they find their way back to the family that's always been there. Hashtag family first, hashtag lovewinks, hashtag praying for healing. Of course, no names mentioned. Harper was too smart to directly say, "My brother-in-law is having a mental breakdown and destroying our family." But she didn't need to. Anyone who'd been following their social media drama for the past week would know exactly who she was talking about. It was like a subtweet, but with emotional manipulation cranked to 11 and a side of Jesus hashtag for good measure. But that was just the opening salvo. The real campaign started when Brooke reposted it with her own edition, a broken heart emoji, and these words, "Some battles are fought privately, but love always wins in the end. Praying for my husband's healing, body, mind, and spirit. Red heart, broken heart, folded hands. Body, mind, and spirit." Like I was some kind of triple threat of dysfunction that needed divine intervention to function normally. Like my decision to stop funding their lifestyle was a symptom of mental illness rather than a long overdue reality check. Within hours, the post had been shared by Diana, Griffin, cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, neighbors who probably couldn't pick me out of a police lineup but were suddenly deeply concerned about my health. The comments section became Prayer Circle meets Intervention Planning Committee, with everyone offering their thoughts and prayers for my recovery and support for my brave wife who was standing by her man during these difficult times. Brave wife. The woman who'd been too busy with lakeside picnics to visit me in the hospital was now being praised as some kind of saint for enduring her clearly unstable husband. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife and serve it at their next drama-free family gathering. But Harper wasn't done. Oh no, this was just Act 1 of her one-woman show called How to Destroy Someone's Reputation Using Instagram Stories and Crocodile Tears. Act 2 came in the form of a video, a shaky handheld masterpiece that looked like it was filmed during an earthquake, but was probably just Harper's hands trembling from the emotional weight of her performance. The video showed her sitting in what I eventually recognized as her car, parked outside their old house. The one they'd lost because they'd been gambling with mortgage payments to fund her boutique fantasies. Piano music played softly in the background because nothing says authentic emotion quite like a carefully curated soundtrack. "I don't usually do this," she began, her voice breaking in just the right places. "But sometimes you have to speak your truth, even when it's hard. Sometimes people we love lash out when they're hurting. Sometimes the people we're trying hardest to help are the ones who push back against us the hardest." She paused here, wiping away a perfectly timed tear that somehow didn't smudge her makeup. Professional grade, emotional manipulation right there. "We've been going through so much as a family lately," she continued. "When someone you love is struggling, when they're dealing with health issues and stress and all the things life throws at us, sometimes they make decisions that hurt the people who love them most. But that doesn't mean you stop loving them. That doesn't mean you give up on them. Health issues and stress, right? Because having a heart attack from working yourself to death to pay for other people's bad financial decisions is just stress. Because cutting off access to bank accounts they've been draining for years is just a symptom of not handling stress well. The video went on like this for about 5 minutes. Harper painting herself and her family as long-suffering victims of my inexplicable cruelty, suggesting that my health problems were enough to make it clear I wasn't thinking straight, but never quite saying anything that might be legally actionable against her. It was like watching a politician give a non-apology apology, except instead of a sex scandal, it was about me having the audacity to control my own finances. Brooke reposted the video with, again, a broken heart emoji and the caption, "My heart is breaking for our whole family right now. Praying for healing and restoration." Broken heart, folded hands, hashtag holding on to faith. And just like that, the narrative was set. I wasn't a man who'd almost died and then discovered his wife's family had been systematically draining his finances for years. I was a sick man lashing out at the people who loved him most. I wasn't someone who'd finally grown a spine and started setting boundaries. I was someone struggling and making decisions that hurt the people who loved him most. The response was immediate and exactly what they hoped for. My phone started buzzing with texts from people I hadn't heard from in months, all wanting to check if I was okay. Cousins from Brooke's side who'd seen the posts, coworkers who'd somehow gotten tagged in the whole mess, even my college roommate who'd somehow been pulled into the drama. "Hey man, saw Brooke's post. You doing all right? I'm here if you need to talk. Thinking of you during this difficult time. Let me know what I can do. Praying for your family. Hope you guys can work through whatever's going on." For a moment there, I actually started to doubt myself. When you have dozens of people reaching out with concern about your mental health, when your own wife is publicly praying for your healing, when your sister-in-law is making tearful videos about how worried she is about you, it starts to mess with your head. Maybe I was being too harsh. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe cutting them off financially really was a sign that I wasn't thinking clearly. But then something beautiful happened. Someone, and I still don't know who, but I owe them a beer and probably my firstborn child, screenshot Harper's old Instagram post. You know, the family picnic one. The one captioned, "Drama-free family day." Some with face red heart, hashtag, blessed, hashtag, family time, hashtag, lake life, hashtag, non-negative. They posted it in the comments of Harper's crying video with a simple caption, "Interesting timing." And just like that, the whole house of cards collapsed because suddenly people started doing math. Harper posting about drama-free family days without me while I was hospitalized. A week later, she's making videos about how much she loves and worries about me. Brooke celebrating my absence from family activities, then positioning herself as the loyal wife standing by her struggling husband. The screenshot spread faster than gossip at a church potluck. People started connecting dots, asking questions, pointing out the timeline. The comments on their posts shifted from sympathy to suspicion. "Wait, wasn't he in the hospital when you posted that picnic photo? So you were worried about him, but didn't visit him? This is confusing. Are you supporting him or celebrating without him?" The internet, bless its chaotic heart, turned on them faster than a pack of wolves turning on a wounded deer. Sponsors started dropping Harper's boutique faster than she could delete comments. Brooke's job put her on administrative review after someone forwarded the entire social media saga to her HR department. Griffin was asked to leave a client meeting when someone mentioned the viral thread about the family trying to scam their son-in-law. Their perfect facade wasn't just cracking, it was completely shattered, right there in public view for everyone to see. And the best part was, they'd done it to themselves. All I had to do was sit back and watch their own lies catch up with them. Watch the internet's collective bullshit detector go into overdrive. Watch their carefully crafted victim narrative collapse under the weight of its own contradictions. Just when I thought Brooke's family had exhausted their entire arsenal of manipulation tactics, guilt trips, financial parasitism, legal scheming, public reputation assassination, they decided to break out what I can only describe as their final boss move. It was like watching someone play their last card in a poker game, except instead of a royal flush, they were holding a joker, 2 threes, and a 1987 McDonald's coupon. I should have known something was up when my discharge from the hospital went too smoothly. No dramatic last-minute appearance by Brooke. No tearful reconciliation attempts. No desperate calls from Griffin about family loyalty and forgiveness. Just blessed silence from the Martinez clan while I packed my few hospital belongings and prepared to start my new life as a man who controlled his own finances. It was almost peaceful, which should have been my first clue that the other shoe was about to drop. The letter arrived 3 days after I got home, delivered by registered mail because apparently this needed to be documented. The return address made my blood run cold. Griffin Martinez, written in the kind of old-fashioned cursive that only his generation still used, like he was personally delivering a declaration of war for 1952. The envelope was thick, not just one sheet, but multiple pages of what looked like official documents. For one paranoid moment, I wondered if they'd found some new legal angle, some obscure law that could let them seize my assets or force me back into their financial web. But when I opened it, what I found was something more psychologically twisted than any lawsuit. It was a will, Griffin's last will and testament, handwritten on legal letterhead, notarized like it was some sacred document instead of a chunk of emotional blackmail disguised as estate planning. The handwriting was shaky, whether from age, emotion, or just the sheer effort of crafting this particular piece of manipulation. I couldn't tell. The document itself was a work of art in the worst possible way. Griffin detailed his estate distribution. I use that term loosely because this man's net worth was probably somewhere between negative 50,000 and absolutely nothing. But he described it like he was dividing up the crown jewels instead of a suburban house that had already been foreclosed on and a 2003 Honda with a check engine light that had been on since Obama's first term. But here's where it got interesting. According to this newly drafted will, all remaining assets, the house they'd lost, the cars they couldn't afford, the imaginary inheritance that existed only in Griffin's delusions, would go to family members who remained united during times of crisis and stood together when others chose to divide. Family members who remained united. Let that phrase sink in for a minute. In Griffin's mind, enabling his family's financial irresponsibility was remaining united, while setting boundaries and refusing to be their personal ATM was choosing to divide. It was like living in some alternate reality where up was down, black was white, and financial responsibility was a character flaw. But the real killer, the part that made me laugh so hard I almost gave myself another heart attack, was the final paragraph, written in what looked like darker ink than the rest, like he'd pressed extra hard to make sure his point was crystal clear. Until he returns to his family and seeks proper reconciliation for the pain and division he has caused, my son-in-law shall receive nothing from this estate. Blood is thicker than water, but family unity is thicker than blood. When he chooses love over pride, he will be welcomed back into the fold with open arms and an open heart. Return to his family. Seek proper reconciliation. This asshole was actually trying to make it sound like I had abandoned them, like I was some prodigal son who needed to crawl home with his tail between his legs and his checkbook in his hand. The beautiful irony was Griffin trying to use an inheritance as bait, the promise of future wealth to lure me back into their orbit. Except there was no wealth. The house was gone because they'd been gambling with mortgage payments. The cars were probably being repossessed as I read his delusional document. Griffin's estate consisted of debt, broken dreams, and a series of get-rich-quick schemes that had never materialized. He was offering me nothing and calling it everything. He was dangling an empty carrot in front of a donkey that had already discovered it could walk away entirely. I read the whole thing twice just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating from residual heart medication. Nope, it was real. Griffin had actually sat down, probably at the same kitchen table where they planned their guardianship scheme, and crafted a document designed to make me feel like I'd miss out on some great inheritance if I didn't crawl back to fund their lifestyle. The timing was perfect, too. This wasn't some document he'd had lying around for years. The date was fresh, written just days after their social media campaign had exploded in their faces. When the crying videos didn't work, when the public shaming backfired, when their reputations were in tatters across the internet, Griffin decided to try one last manipulation. The promise of non-existent wealth, conditional on my return to financial servitude. It was like watching someone try to sell you a bridge they don't own, with money they don't have, while standing in a river they can't cross. The sheer audacity was almost admirable if you could separate it from the complete moral bankruptcy that made it possible. I called Victor because at this point he'd become my unofficial consultant for all things related to Martinez family insanity, and read him the will over the phone. The silence that followed was so long I thought the call had dropped. "Grandpa, you still there?" "Son," he finally said, his voice carrying that special mixture of amusement and disgust that only comes from witnessing something truly spectacular in its awfulness. "That man is trying to bribe you with nothing and calling it something. So what do I do?" "You keep doing what you've been doing. You walk away. You let them keep their imaginary inheritance and their conditional love and their family unity that only exists when someone else is paying for it." But I knew it wasn't as simple as just walking away. This final manipulation, this last desperate attempt to make me feel like I was missing out on something valuable, it needed a response. Not the response they wanted, not a tearful phone call begging to be welcomed back into the family fold, but something that would make it crystal clear that their psychological games were over. That's when I made the call that would end this once and for all. Not to Griffin, not to Brooke, not to any of them. I called my lawyer and told him I wanted permanent no-contact orders against the entire Martinez family. No more calls, no more letters, no more registered mail documents full of manipulation disguised as legal paperwork. For the first time in 8 years of marriage, I was cutting the final cord. I didn't want Griffin's inheritance. I didn't want their conditional love. I didn't want their family unity that only existed when I was writing checks. I wanted freedom. And finally, I was willing to pay for it. The day I walked out of St. Mary's Hospital for the last time, Victor was waiting in the parking lot with his ancient Toyota Camry. The kind of car that looked like it was built during the Carter administration, but ran like it could survive nuclear winter. No fanfare, no dramatic music, no movie moment where everything suddenly made sense. Just an old man in a worn leather jacket leaning against a car that had seen better decades, ready to drive me wherever came next. "You ready?" he asked, loading my pathetic collection of hospital belongings into his trunk. A plastic bag full of get-well cards from co-workers who barely knew me. Some clothes that smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. And a folder full of legal documents that officially severed every tie between me and the people who'd spent 8 years treating me like a personal piggy bank. Ready as a 35-year-old man can be to start over with nothing but a cardiac event and a new appreciation for how shitty people can be. Victor laughed and started the car, which made sounds suggesting it was held together by prayers and spite, but somehow kept running anyway. "Son, you're not starting over with nothing. You're starting over without the wrong people. That's not the same thing." We drove through the city, past the suburbs where Brooke and I had lived in our perfect little house with our perfect little mortgage and our perfectly shitty relationship, past the shopping centers and chain restaurants, and all the familiar landmarks of the life I was shedding like a snake molting its skin. The farther we got from civilization, the easier it became to breathe. Like the air itself was getting cleaner with increased distance between me and the disaster zone my marriage had become. "Where exactly are we going?" I asked, watching the landscape change from suburban sprawl to actual trees and open space. It had been so long since I'd seen anything that wasn't concrete or asphalt, I'd almost forgotten what real nature looked like. "Place I found online," Victor said, navigating these country roads like he'd been driving them all his life. "Little cabin up in the mountains. Owner wants to sell, but he's willing to rent month to month while you figure things out. No neighbors close enough to borrow sugar. No homeowners association telling you what color you can paint your mailbox. No drama for miles around. Mountains. I'd forgotten such places even existed. Places where your biggest worry was whether you had enough firewood for winter, not whether your sister-in-law was going to drain your business account to pay for her latest entrepreneurial fantasy. Places where silence was actually silent, not filled with the constant buzz of anxiety, obligation, and other people's emergencies. The cabin was everything Victor had promised and completely different from what I'd expected. It wasn't some luxury mountain retreat. with granite countertops and hot tubs. It was just a simple, honest building that had been constructed to serve a purpose, not to impress anyone. Log walls that had weathered decades of mountain winters. A front porch that looked designed for sitting and thinking, not posing for Instagram photos. Windows that faced east, toward the sunrise instead of toward the neighbor's judgment. Jesus, I said, getting out of the car and actually feeling my shoulders relax for the first time in months. It's perfect. Owner's name is Wade, Victor said, pulling my bags from the trunk. Retired park ranger. Lost his wife last year. Decided he wants to move to Florida to be closer to his kids. Says this place has good energy, whatever that means. But he sounded like good people on the phone. Good people. After spending so many years surrounded by people who were very good at looking good while slowly poisoning everything they touched, I'd almost forgotten what that phrase meant. But standing on that porch, looking at mountains that couldn't be manipulated or guilt into providing money they didn't have, I was starting to remember what peace felt like. The inside of the cabin was as honest as the outside. Hardwood floors that showed their age but didn't apologize for it. A stone fireplace that was clearly meant for actual warmth, not just decoration. Furniture that prioritized comfort over style. A kitchen that was small but functional. The kind of place where you could make real food, not just heat up whatever you grab from drive-thrus between overtime shifts paying other people's bills. But the best part, the part that made me understand why Victor had driven 3 hours to find this place, was the silence. Not the oppressive silence of people not talking to each other. Not the tense silence of waiting for the next crisis to explode, but real, honest-to-God peace and quiet. The kind of quiet where you could hear yourself think for the first time in years. I talked to that tech company you applied to before all this shit happened, Victor said, settling into an armchair that looked like it had been worn smooth by decades of good conversations. They're still interested, and they don't mind you working remote. 40 hours a week instead of the 60 you were pulling before, better benefits. Nobody expecting you to be available for emergencies at 3 a.m. 40 hours a week. I'd forgotten that was even possible. For years, I've been working every available hour, taking on extra projects and overtime shifts. Not because I loved my job, but because there was always someone who needed money for something. Harper's boutique inventory, Griffin's home improvement disasters, Brooke's shopping habits that always seemed to expand to fill any available budget. I'd been living like a hamster on a wheel, running faster and faster to keep up with other people's spending. Salaries less than you were making before, Victor continued. But you'd be surprised how far money stretches when you're not supporting 4 other adults and their various disasters. On my first night in the cabin, I sat on the front porch and watched the sun set behind mountains that had existed before my marriage and would still be there long after Brooke found her next victim. I cooked dinner in a kitchen that belonged to me, in a house where nobody expected me to solve their problems or fund their dreams or apologize for having boundaries. For the first time in 8 years, I went to sleep without setting 17 alarms or making mental lists of whose crisis I needed to handle the next day. I just slept like a normal human being, one who wasn't responsible for other people's happiness and financial security. When I woke up the next morning, sunlight streaming through windows that faced mountains instead of neighbors' drama. I could hear birds singing instead of text notification, sounds demanding immediate attention and financial assistance. Victor was already up, sitting on the porch with coffee and a newspaper, reading like a man with all the time in the world because he'd learned the difference between urgent and important sometime around 1987. "Good morning," I said, joining him on the porch with my own coffee cup. Real coffee, not the emergency caffeine I'd been surviving on for years. "Sleep well." Like the dead, which considering recent events is probably not the best analogy. He laughed, the sound carrying across the mountains like it belonged there, like peace was something you could hear when you got far enough away from people who confused love with exploitation. 6 months into my new life, and I developed what you might call a routine. If a routine could be built around the radical concept of not caring about other people's manufactured emergencies. I woke up when my body felt like waking up, not when my phone started buzzing with demands for immediate financial assistance. I drank coffee while watching sunrise paint the mountains different shades of gold and purple, not while scrolling through text about whose rent was due or which bills had gone to collections this week. It was fucking glorious. The remote work had proven to be everything Victor had promised and more. 40 hours of actual work per week instead of 60 hours of work plus 20 hours of crisis management for people who confused poor planning with bad luck. My new colleagues treated me like a professional, not like a human ATM. And my boss had this crazy idea that work-life balance was actually important for productivity. Revolutionary stuff. But the best part wasn't the work or the mountains or even the cabin that had become more like home in 6 months than the house I'd shared with Brooke for 8 years. The best part was the quiet in my head. For the first time since getting married, I wasn't constantly calculating who needed what money when. No more mentally juggling payment schedules, credit limits, and emergency funding for other people's bad decisions. It's not like Brooke's family had given up entirely. Oh no, these people had the persistence of cockroaches and about the same amount of shame. Every few weeks, someone would test the boundaries of the no-contact order, like they were probing fortress walls for weak spots. Usually through distant relatives recruited as flying monkeys. Cousin Ivy would call to chat about family news, somehow managing to mention how heartbroken Brooke was about our separation. Uncle Nash would send Facebook messages asking if I'd heard about Griffin's latest health scare. Nothing serious, just convenient excuses to reach out and remind me that family was important. Brooke's college roommate would leave voicemails saying how worried she was about both of us. Maybe we could all grab coffee and work things out. The manipulation was so transparent, it would have been funny if it wasn't so pathetic. These people had turned guilt trips into an art form, throwing everything they could think of at the wall to see what would stick. Health scares, financial emergencies, carefully worded updates about how much they missed me and wanted me back in their lives. It was like watching a masterclass in emotional blackmail taught by people who'd never quite grasped that their student had graduated and moved on. My personal favorite was the Christmas card that somehow made it through my mail filters. A beautiful family photo. Brooke, Harper, Griffin, Diana, all gathered around a perfectly decorated tree in what looked like someone else's living room since they'd lost their house. Everyone smiling those forced holiday smiles that probably took 47 takes to get right. The inscription inside was, "Wishing you peace. Enjoy this holiday season. You've been in our thoughts and prayers. Love, the Martinez family." The Martinez family, like they were some kind of brand instead of a collection of individuals who'd spent years treating me like their personal financial planning service. The audacity was suffocating. Really, they'd literally try to have me declared mentally incompetent to steal my money, and now they were sending me Christmas cards about love and prayers. I showed the card to Victor, who'd started spending most evenings on my porch, reading books and providing commentary on the various attempts to breach my psychological defenses. He looked at it for about 10 seconds, chuckled, and handed it back to me. "You know what that is, right?" he said. "Desperation bait disguised as holiday cheer. They're fishing to see if you'll bite. See if enough time has passed that you've forgotten why you left in the first place." But here's the thing. I hadn't forgotten. If anything, the distance had given me perspective on just how toxic the whole situation had been. Life without constant money demands had shown me what financial security actually felt like. Sleeping through the night without worrying about the next crisis that would wake me up had reminded me what peace was supposed to look like. Having conversations that weren't thinly disguised requests for financial assistance had helped me remember what real human connection was like. The latest attempt came just last week, delivered through Brooke's therapist, of all people. Apparently, Brooke had been seeing someone to process the trauma of her marriage ending, because being cut off from other people's bank accounts was traumatic now, and the therapist suggested that closure would be helpful for both of us. The therapist called me directly, which should have been my first red flag. Professional boundaries aren't really that flexible, and therapists don't usually cold call their patients' spouses, suggesting family reunion sessions. But apparently, Brooke had painted such a convincing picture of our marriage crumbling due to my health crisis and untreated trauma that this woman genuinely believed she was helping. "I understand you've been going through a difficult time," the therapist said, her voice carrying that special blend of professional concern and personal judgment that only comes from hearing one side of a very complicated story. Brooke has been working hard to understand her role in your relationship's breakdown, and she's made significant progress in therapy. She was hoping you might be willing to attend a joint session for healing and closure. Healing and closure, right? Because nothing says healing quite like sitting in a room with someone who'd spent years financially exploiting you while a therapist who'd only heard their version of events tried to facilitate a reconciliation that would inevitably end with me writing checks again. I politely declined, explaining that I'd found my closure in the mountains and didn't need any healing beyond being treated like something other than a human credit card. The therapist seemed genuinely surprised, like she couldn't understand why I wouldn't want to repair a relationship with people who tried to have me declared mentally incompetent. But that's the beauty of peace. Once you've actually experienced it, it becomes pretty easy to identify everything that threatens it. And Brooke's family, with their manufactured emergencies, conditional love, and expert-level manipulation skills, represented the complete opposite of everything I'd built for myself in these mountains. So I delete voicemails without listening to them. I throw away cards without reading them. I block numbers, emails, and social media accounts. When new ones appear, I block those too. Because here's what I learned in 6 months of actual peace. You don't negotiate with emotional terrorists. You don't engage with people who confuse love with exploitation. And you definitely don't feel guilty about protecting the life you've built from people who want to destroy it for their own benefit. They can keep their stories. They can tell anyone willing to listen about the heartless husband who abandoned his family when they needed him most. They can continue playing the victim, posting their carefully curated tales of woe on social media, collecting sympathy from people who don't know the full truth. I have something better than their stories. I have the truth, and the truth gave me peace. And peace, it turns out, is worth more than being loved by people who only loved me when I was useful. That's the end of today's story. For more captivating tales, hit subscribe and never miss an episode.